Hey guys, welcome to the Sleepless Explainer. If you've ever found yourself lying awake at night thinking about strange questions, impossible choices or paradoxes that seem to bend reality, then you're in the right place. This space is about slowing down, listening, and letting those ideas sink in deeply, the kind that make you question what you know and wonder about what you don't. Before we start, take a second and comment where you're from. It's always incredible to see how far this little corner of the world reaches. And if you genuinely enjoy what we do here, consider liking the video and maybe subscribing. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's dive into tonight's journey together. In Athens, there once stood a ship tied in the harbour not only by ropes but by memory, a vessel that belonged to Theseus, the hero who had sailed upon it in stories that the people told again and again. To the Athenians, this was not simply wood bound together. It was a link to their past, a symbol of victory, courage, and identity, and so they treasured it with care. Imagine walking slowly along the edge of the harbour, the air warm and filled with the scent of salt, and there before you rests the ship. Its timbers rise quietly from the water, its sails hang in stillness when the wind has calmed, and the ropes stretch from its sides to the stone posts along the dock, thick and strong, keeping it steady. The people pass by and point to it, some stopping to look more closely, parents bending down to tell their children that this is the very vessel their hero once commanded. The sound of the city hums in the distance, but here at the water's edge there is a stillness, as though the ship itself carries a silence within it, a weight of time that slows everything down. The boards along its sides show marks of years already lived, scratches from voyages, lines where the sun has left its trace, and yet to the eyes of the people it is whole, complete, exactly as it should be. The Athenians do not treat it as just another ship, one among many, but as something set apart, worthy of attention and preservation, and they return to it again and again to make sure it remains as it should. Time, however, never stands still, and even as the ship rests quietly in the harbour, the seasons turn, the rains fall, the summers burn, and the years slowly move on. The sea air carries salt that creeps into the wood, softening it, bending it, working patiently on each plank. Ropes stiffen after too many storms, fibres begin to snap one by one, sails weaken after being stretched again and again by the wind. These are not sudden changes but gradual ones, almost invisible, like the way a stone wears smooth beneath running water. And so the Athenians begin to care for it in a different way. They do not want to lose it, and so they repair it piece by piece. When a board weakens, they remove it carefully and slide a new one into place. When a rope frays, they take it down and replace it with one freshly woven. When the mast bends too far, they lift it out with effort and set another firmly where it once stood. To those who look upon the ship from a distance, nothing seems unusual. It is still the ship they know, the one tied to the stories of Theseus, the one resting in their harbour year after year. The people are content, for they believe they have kept it alive, preserved it as it always was. To them it is still the same vessel, unbroken in its presence, unchanged in its meaning. What matters to them now is not the condition of each individual plank, but the whole form before their eyes, the story that connects them to it, and the name that has never been lost. Imagine standing by that harbour yourself, watching the sunlight shift across the surface of the water, hearing the faint sound of the ropes pulling gently against the posts, and seeing the ship as it rests. You would not think to ask about what has been replaced or how much of it is new. You would only see the whole, steady and calm, and you would call it what everyone calls it, the Ship of Theseus. And for the moment, that is enough. Its mystery does not need to be spoken yet. The question that will one day rise remains hidden, waiting beneath the surface, just as a current moves quietly below the calm of the sea. For now the ship simply rests in your imagination, steady, certain, a vessel tied to a memory that the Athenians wanted never to fade. And as we drift forward through this story, you will see how the calm surface begins to shift, slowly, gently, and without hurry, toward the paradox that still lingers with us today. The harbour of Athens was never silent. It was a living heart of the city, where ships rocked gently against the water, their sails folding and unfolding as crews prepared them for journeys across the Aegean. Merchants shouted their prices to the crowd, fishermen brought in their catches still glistening from the sea, and the smell of salt mixed with smoke from cooking fires that drifted along the breeze. Children wove between the stone piers, chasing each other while their parents worked, and travellers from distant places stepped onto the docks, carrying with them news and rumours from across the Mediterranean. Amid this constant activity there was one vessel that did not join the flow of comings and goings, a ship that remained still, resting in the same place year after year, a ship that was looked upon with reverence, for it was said to have carried Theseus himself. The Athenians did not see it as just another vessel. They saw it as a living piece of their identity, something more permanent than the bustling life of the marketplace, more constant than the voices of merchants or the changing seasons. To them it was a monument to their past, a reminder that the stories of courage and triumph which shaped their city were not just words told by elders, but realities that had once touched wood and water, wind and sail. Imagine the people of Athens in those days. They lived in a city of marble and stone, where temples rose into the sky, and statues of gods watched over the streets. Life was bound to ritual, and every act of daily living carried some echo of the sacred. When they walked past the harbour, they did not simply see ropes and planks. They saw a connection between themselves and their hero, a vessel that bridged the space between myth and memory. Parents would guide their children to the docks and point out the ship, telling them that this was the very one Theseus had sailed, and in the eyes of the children the wood seemed to hold within it all the victories and adventures of the past. Sailors passing by would glance at it with respect, for it reminded them that their own voyages were part of something larger, part of a tradition that stretched back into legend. And for the elders, those who remembered their city's history most vividly, the ship stood as proof that the stories of Theseus were not just tales meant to inspire, but realities that could still be touched. To walk through Athens in those days was to walk through a place where past and present were woven together seamlessly. At every street corner there was a shrine to some god or spirit, offerings of grain and wine laid carefully in bowls, prayers whispered softly into the air. The people did not think of memory and reality as separate. They believed that the past lived alongside them, and that the presence of their hero's ship was a natural continuation of this truth. The vessel stood quietly at the edge of the sea, its hull darkened by time, its ropes stretched firm against the docks, its sails tied when not in use, and yet to all who saw it, it remained unchanged. It was always the Ship of Theseus, never in doubt, never in question. Even as storms weathered the harbour walls and years etched their lines into the stone, the ship seemed to stand beyond those changes, a constant image in the minds of the people who passed it every day. It is easy to imagine the way the harbour must have sounded when the wind blew strongly, the ropes tightening with creaks, the wooden boards knocking softly against the dock, the waves rushing up against the stone piers. Amid all these sounds, the Ship of Theseus carried its silence. It did not need to speak. Its presence alone was enough. The Athenians tended to it carefully, sanding down rough edges, tightening ropes, patching what was worn, not because they believed it might vanish if they failed, but because it had to remain. The act of preserving it was not only about protecting wood, it was about protecting memory. each hand that touched the ship became part of a long chain of devotion, one generation passing the responsibility to the next, never allowing the vessel to be forgotten. The ship resting in the harbour became as much a ritual as the temples above the city. It was not an object abandoned to time. It was alive in the minds of those who saw it, alive in the stories told around it, alive in the careful work of the men who repaired it. For now there was no puzzle, no paradox, only the simple presence of a ship that anchored a city to its own story, a vessel that seemed to belong both to the sea and to memory, waiting quietly as the centuries turned around it. The vessel that rested in the harbour had not always been a monument. It had once been new, crafted carefully by hands that understood both the sea and the wood that would face it. Long before it was tied forever to memory, it was only timber taken from trees that had grown on the hillsides of Greece, cut down in the slow rhythm of axes striking against bark, the sound carrying through valleys where echoes faded into silence. Each trunk was dragged to the shore, where craftsmen split them into planks, smoothing their surfaces with blades, sanding the edges until they fit perfectly against one another. Resin seeped from the wood, filling the air with its sharp scent while fires burned steadily nearby to heat the tools. The men who built the ship did not rush their work. They measured every beam, tested every joint, and lashed the pieces together with rope strong enough to endure the pull of storms. The hull rose gradually, first a skeleton of beams, then a shape filling in, then a body that began to resemble something alive. To stand among them as they worked would have been to hear the creak of rope, the clatter of hammers, the hum of voices calling instructions, all merging into a steady rhythm of creation. When it was finished, it gleamed with freshness. The wood was pale where the sun touched it, smooth to the eye and to the hand. The oars were lined neatly along its sides, waiting for the strength of men to push them into the sea. The sail, woven carefully from fibres stretched on looms, hung bright and strong, ready to drink in the wind. Everything about it carried the strength of something untouched by time, a vessel at its beginning. Picture it resting at the edge of the water, its reflection stretching across the ripples, the sound of waves knocking gently against its sides. The first crew stepped onto it with reverence, their sandals pressing against the boards that had never before carried weight, their hands tightening the ropes that had never before been tested. And then the ship moved, leaning into the sea as the oars struck in unison, as the sail filled and the vessel became more than pieces joined together. It became one being, a whole, something alive in the water. For the people of Athens, watching it sail for the first time was to witness more than a ship departing. It was to witness the beginning of memory, for it was not just any voyage, it was Theseus's voyage, and that meant it carried the presence of their hero. In that moment, the ship was bound not only to the sea, but to identity, to myth, to pride. The image of that first sailing lodged itself deeply in the minds of the Athenians, and it was that image, perfect and whole, that they carried with them ever after. When they spoke of the Ship of Theseus, it was this original vessel they imagined, the one with every plank in place, every rope new, every sail strong. It became more than wood and rope. It became an idea, an ideal form, something against which every later moment would be measured. The Athenians came to believe that they were preserving it, holding on to that original completeness, even as time inevitably began to wear it down. In their minds, the ship was not just a collection of parts. It was Theseus's ship, whole and unbroken, a vessel that carried within it the presence of their hero. To stand before it in those early days was to see not decay or change, but only wholeness. The boards gleamed in the sunlight, the rope stretched tight, the sail caught the breeze, and the water around it shimmered as though the sea itself recognized the weight of what it carried. No one thought then about what would come later. about the slow passage of years, about the repairs that would one day be necessary. All they saw was unity, completeness, a ship that seemed as eternal as the story it represented. And it was that sense of wholeness, that memory of the original vessel in its perfect form, that lingered in Athens long after the timber had begun to age. It became the reference point, the standard, the image that gave them confidence when they made their first small repairs. For to them, the ship was not just the sum of its materials, it was a presence, a continuity, something that seemed to carry its own identity no matter how time moved forward. The years moved forward, and the ship that had once gleamed with freshness began to feel the quiet touch of time. The sun hardened its boards, the rain seeped into its fibres, and the salt of the sea worked its way into every surface. What was once smooth and new began to carry marks of use, lines etched by weather, scratches left by voyages, and the faint softening that comes when wood begins to age. The Athenians who walked past it in the harbour did not think of this as decline. They thought of it as natural, for all things yield to time in small degrees, and yet their devotion to the ship made them unwilling to allow those signs of age to grow unchecked. And so came the first repairs. They were small at first, almost invisible. A board along the side had split where rainwater had settled, and so it was carefully removed and replaced with another, fitted into the same space with precision, so that the line of the hull was unbroken. A rope frayed at its edges, strands snapping one by one as the tension grew too heavy, and so a new rope was brought, thicker, stronger, lashed into place with the same knots that had held the old one. These actions did not change the way the ship looked to the people who passed it by. It still rested in the harbour, still carried the same name, still seemed to them exactly as it always had. If you had asked them whether it was the same vessel that had once carried Theseus, they would have answered without hesitation. Of course it was. Nothing had changed. It was the same ship, cared for and preserved. But time does not stop with a single repair. The seasons continued their patient work, each year carrying storms, heat and salt, each year asking for another adjustment, another act of preservation. A mast weakened where it had bent too often under strong winds, and so it was taken down and replaced with one newly cut, its surface clean and its grain unbroken. Nails rusted, so they were pulled out and set aside, while new ones were hammered gently into place. Small planks near the deck warped after too many summers, and so fresh wood was laid down where the old had once rested. Still the Athenians saw no problem. To them it was simple. The ship was the ship of Theseus, and to allow it to weaken would be to lose a treasure. Each repair was a way of honouring it, of keeping it alive. They did not see themselves as changing it, but as preserving it. And the more they worked, the more natural the process became. When they saw a flaw, they didn't hesitate. They knew what to do. Replace what is weak, restore what is broken, and the ship will endure. If you imagine yourself standing by the harbour in those years, you would not notice anything unusual. The ship before you would look strong, complete, perhaps even timeless. The people around you would point to it with the same reverence as before, their voices carrying the same pride, their stories unchanged. And yet beneath the surface, small differences had begun to appear. The vessel you saw was no longer exactly the same as the one that had first sailed, for parts of it had been exchanged, but the continuity of its presence, the fact that it had never left its place, the fact that it still bore the same name, made these changes invisible. In the minds of the Athenians, it was the same ship without question, and the idea of it being otherwise did not even occur to them. The identity of the ship was carried not in the boards themselves, but in the whole, in the constant recognition of those who looked upon it. The first repairs seemed so natural, so necessary, that they raise no doubts, and this is what makes them important. They remind us that change often begins quietly, unnoticed, accepted without thought. The Ship of Theseus was still the Ship of Theseus, as far as anyone believed, because the repairs were only meant to protect what had always been. There was no question, no paradox yet, only the simple act of preservation. And yet, as those first planks were removed, as those first ropes were replaced, a process had begun, a process that would continue steadily across years and decades, until the ship that stood in the harbour was something very different from what it had once been, though to the eyes of Athens it remained unchanged. What began as a single repair did not remain a single repair for long, because time is patient and unrelenting, and no ship, no matter how carefully preserved, can escape the slow pressure of years. The Athenians who cared for the vessel accepted this as part of their duty, and they worked upon it with hands trained not only in craftsmanship but in reverence, for they were not building something new, they were protecting something sacred. The first plank had been replaced quietly, and the ship looked no different for it. Then another followed, then a third, until the rhythm of repair became something like a ritual, a task that belonged to the life of the city itself. Imagine them stepping onto its deck in the dim light of morning, the boards cool with night air, the scent of tar and salt thick in their nostrils, their eyes scanning the hull for any sign of weakness. A carpenter would run his hand along the side until his palm felt softness where strength should have been, and he would nod for another to fetch fresh timber, wood cut from the hills, still carrying the scent of resin within it. The old plank would be lifted carefully away, and the new one slid into place, tapped down until it fit snugly, hammered with nails that shone for only a moment before weather dimmed them. A sailor would untie ropes that had grown stiff, their fibres frayed from years of strain, and he would coil them neatly before setting them aside, replacing them with ropes newly woven, thick, strong, smelling faintly of hemp. A mast that had leaned too far in storm winds would be lowered by many men working together, their voices calling out in rhythm as they guided it to the ground, and another mast would be lifted up straighter, fresher, but filling the same place, ready to bear the sails again. None of these acts were seen as transformations. To the people watching from the harbour walls, the ship looked unchanged, whole, exactly as they had always known it. Children pointed to it as their parents had. Elders told stories of Theseus with the same pride. Sailors looked upon it with respect, and none thought to question whether the vessel before them was different from the one that had first sailed. Continuity concealed everything, because it had never left the harbour, because it had never lost its name, because it had never ceased to be cared for. The Athenians could not imagine it as anything other than the Ship of Theseus. But beneath the surface, the truth was different. Year by year, repair by repair, the ship's body was being exchanged, the substance of it giving way to something new. Imagine standing at the dock not for a day, not for a year, but returning across decades. Each time you would see the same outline against the sea, the same mast cutting into the sky, the same ropes creaking softly in the wind. To you it would feel eternal, unchanged, but if your eyes could hold the memory of its first form beside its present one, you would see a difference so complete that not a single piece remained from what once carried Theseus himself. This is the way gradual change hides itself, not in sudden shocks, but in quiet adjustments, each one so small that it is invisible, yet together so complete that they replace everything. The Athenians didn't notice, because there was never a moment to notice. There was no day when the ship stopped being and then became again. There was only continuity, the comfort of seeing it always there, the reassurance of pointing to it and knowing its name. And so they lived beside a paradox without knowing it, preserving the ship of Theseus by dismantling it piece by piece, protecting identity through a process that slowly erased the very materials they thought they were saving. The process of change was not an interruption. It was the life of the vessel itself, and the Athenians accepted it as naturally as they accepted the rising of the sun or the turning of the seasons. Every act of repair became part of its story, part of what it meant to be the ship, until the cycle of loss and renewal was indistinguishable from the identity they thought they were preserving. The vessel that stood in the harbour was no longer the vessel that once set out with Theseus, yet in the eyes of the city it had never ceased to be the same, for what mattered to them was not the wood or the rope, but the presence, the memory, the unbroken thread of continuity that gave them comfort each time they looked upon it. The ship continued to stand in the harbour, cared for by countless hands, passed from one generation to the next, and to each person who looked upon it, it seemed the same vessel it had always been. But slowly, beneath the comfort of familiarity, a question began to take shape, not shouted, not even spoken aloud at first, but rising gently in the mind like a ripple spreading across still water. Every plank that had once been nailed in place by the original builders was gone. Every rope that once stretched taut under the hand of Theseus had been replaced. Every mast that had once leaned into the Aegean winds had been removed and set aside, and every nail and joint had been renewed until nothing of the first ship remained. What stood in the harbour was a vessel of new timber and new rope, fresh materials shaped in the likeness of the old. And yet the Athenians called it by the same name, revered it with the same pride, told their children the same stories as they passed. But if the material had been entirely exchanged, what made it the same ship? Was it the continuity of its presence, the way it had never left the harbour, the way it was always tended with care, the way it was always pointed out as the ship of Theseus? Or was its identity tied to the substance of its parts, the original planks and ropes and masts that once bore the weight of a hero? Imagine standing on the dock as the sun sets, the air filled with the sound of gulls, the water breaking softly against stone, and in front of you the vessel rocks gently, its reflection shimmering across the ripples. You're told it is the ship of Theseus, and you believe it, because it looks unchanged, because the city itself believes it, because it has never been absent from its place. But then imagine another voice beside you, whispering that none of its parts are original, that every piece has been replaced across the years, and suddenly the certainty fades. You look again, and the same question returns, patient but persistent. Is it still the same ship? If identity is in the material, then perhaps the ship of Theseus no longer exists, for the matter of it has been lost. If identity is in continuity, then perhaps it endures, carried forward through memory and recognition, never broken, never interrupted, preserved not by timber, but by the agreement of those who name it. The paradox is that both feel true and both feel incomplete. To call it the same is to ignore that nothing of the original remains. To call it different is to ignore that it has never ceased to exist in the eyes of those who tend it, and so the mind drifts between the two possibilities, circling without end. Think of the craftsman who replaces a single plank. To him, it is no different from repairing his sandals or patching his cloak. He does not believe he has created a new ship. He believes he has saved the old. Think of the elder telling a child that this is the ship of Theseus. He is not concerned with the grain of the wood or the twist of the rope. He is concerned with the story, the name, the presence, and so in his telling it is unquestionably the same. Yet think also of the philosopher, standing quietly apart, watching as the old parts are carried away in carts, and realizing that piece by piece, without anyone seeing the moment it happened, the vessel before him is no longer the one that once left the shore. In this recognition lies the paradox, calm, yet unresolvable, for identity can be seen in both the material and in the memory, and when the two no longer align, the question remains suspended, never answered, never silenced. The ship in the harbour is the Ship of Theseus, because the people say it is, because it has always been called so, because its continuity has never been broken. But the ship in the harbour is not the Ship of Theseus, because nothing of the original remains, because it is made of other wood, other rope, other nails. Both statements feel true, and yet they cannot exist together, and so the puzzle lingers, patient and steady, like the ship itself rocking gently in the harbour. When the Athenians looked upon the ship in their harbour, they didn't concern themselves with the details of which plank had been replaced, or which rope had been retied. They saw the vessel as a whole, standing before them in its familiar form, and they believed firmly that it was the same ship they had always known. Identity for them was not a matter of the wood itself, but of the continuity of the vessel's presence, the fact that it had never left its place, never ceased to be tended, never lost its name. Continuity was the anchor that made them certain, and in their certainty the ship endured. Imagine a father walking with his son along the docks, the boy tugging at his sleeve, curious at the sight of so many vessels rocking against the water. The father lifts him high enough to see above the crowd and points toward the familiar outline. He does not say, "That is a ship made of new planks repaired many times." He says, "That is the Ship of Theseus." The boy believes it without question, for it does not matter to him what material lies beneath the surface. What matters is that the ship has always been called by that name, that his father recognizes it, that it stands where it has always stood. In this way, the ship lives not only in wood and rope, but in story and recognition, and it is this recognition that allows its identity to stretch across centuries without interruption. Continuity is powerful because it does not require sameness of material, only sameness of thread, a line carried forward without break. Think of a river flowing from the mountains to the sea. The water you touch today is not the same as the water you touched yesterday, yet you still call it by one name. It has changed completely in substance, but its flow is unbroken. And because its path remains the same, you do not doubt that it is still the same river. Think of the fields outside the city, green in spring, golden in summer, barren in winter. Each season changes the field entirely, and yet the people of Athens still call it the same place, because they see continuity in the land itself. Or think of a flame flickering in a lamp. The oil burns, the wick shortens, the light trembles and renews itself each second, and yet you say it is the same flame, though it is never made of the same fire for more than an instant. The Ship of Theseus can be understood in the same way. Each piece may have been replaced, but the continuity of its form, its name, its recognition, makes it endure as the same vessel. To the Athenians this was obvious. Each time they replaced a plank, they did not declare it a new ship, they declared it a saved ship, a preserved ship. They believed that repairing it kept its identity alive, not destroyed it. This ship was a thread stretched across time, and each new board, each new rope was woven into that thread so that it never broke. And perhaps this is not only true of ships, perhaps it is true of ourselves as well. A human body is never still. Its cells are replaced constantly. Its hair grows and falls, its skin changes, its bones strengthen and weaken. And yet through all this quiet replacement, we believe we remain the same person. The child you once were is gone. The matter that composed you then no longer exists within you now, and yet you still carry that child within your identity, because continuity has never been broken. Memory ties each stage together, recognition binds them, and so you're able to say with quiet certainty, "I am the same." This is what the Athenians practiced without knowing they were philosophers, for in treating the ship as unbroken, they revealed a belief in continuity as the foundation of identity. The Ship of Theseus was the Ship of Theseus because it had always been called so, because it had always been recognized so, because it had never ceased to stand before them, and in that way it endured, not in wood or rope, but in story and memory. The Athenians who cared for the vessel of Theseus never thought much about what became of the parts they removed. To them, the ship itself was what mattered, the presence that stood in their harbour, the continuity they could point to, the name they could repeat to their children. But the pieces that were taken away never simply ceased to exist. Each board removed from the hull was set aside somewhere. Each oar, cracked with age, was stacked against a wall. Each rope, frayed from salt winds, was coiled up and left in storage. Each mast, lowered carefully to the ground, was leaned against stone. Even the nails and bolts pulled free were gathered, tarnished with rust but still solid. Slowly, quietly, the material body of the original ship grew into a separate collection, scattered yet real, carrying within it the weight of the past. Imagine piles of wood stacked along the edge of the docks, beams marked with scratches from waves long gone, darkened with stains from rain and sun, still smelling faintly of resin. Imagine coils of rope, thick and heavy, stiff with years of salt, lying bundled in corners of warehouses where shipbuilders kept their supplies. Imagine the old mast lying silent in the shade, its surface etched by storms, its height diminished but not erased, its grain still strong enough to stand. For many these were scraps, the inevitable remains of time, but for someone with vision they were the bones of something greater. Now picture a shipwright who begins to gather them together, not as trash but as treasure. Perhaps at first it is only curiosity that drives him. A plank salvaged from the pile, an oar repaired instead of discarded, a rope spliced back together. He begins to fit them, testing how they might join again, and slowly an idea takes hold. Why let these pieces fade, when together they might still form a whole? And so he works, carefully and patiently, laying out the keel with the original timber, raising the sides with the old boards, hammering in the weathered nails, tying the ropes through the loops they once knew, lifting the mast that Theseus himself might have seen swaying above him as he faced the waves. The work is slow, but it is steady, and in time the shape of a vessel begins to rise, not new, not fresh, but familiar, carrying in its frame every mark of the past. And at last there are two ships. The first is the one the Athenians have tended so faithfully, always present in the harbour, never absent, always recognised, its identity protected by the unbroken thread of memory. The second is the one made from the original parts, the matter once touched by the hero himself, the boards that once creaked beneath his feet, the ropes that once pulled his sails, the mast that once bore the force of storms. Which of these is truly the Ship of Theseus? You stand at the harbour and see them both. On one side the repaired vessel shines with care, its planks smooth, its ropes taut, its shape continuous across centuries. On the other side the rebuilt vessel stands weathered but proud, every piece of it carrying authenticity, every board carrying history, every nail carrying the memory of hands that first placed it. Which one deserves the name? Your mind shifts back and forth. You cannot deny the claim of continuity, but you cannot dismiss the claim of substance. One has the story, the other has the body. One has the soul, the other has the flesh. And in this tension the paradox expands. Some would argue the maintained ship must be the real one, because it has always been there, always known, never interrupted. Others would argue the rebuilt ship must be the real one, because it alone contains what Theseus once touched. Both feel right, both feel true, and yet they cannot both be the same, for two ships cannot be one. You look again, and you realize the question has no clear answer. The duplicate ship does not solve the problem, it deepens it. It shows that identity is not a single thread, but many, and when those threads pull in opposite directions, the mind cannot choose which to follow, and so you are left between them, caught in the quiet space where both seem real and both seem false, where sameness is split into two bodies that rock side by side upon the water, and where the question drifts without end, as endless as the sea itself. The Athenians themselves may not have stood at the docks debating the deeper meaning of their repairs, but the story of the Ship of Theseus did not stay only in their city. It slipped into the minds of thinkers, first in Greece, then far beyond, carried across centuries as a quiet but persistent puzzle. The earliest philosophers saw in it a chance to test their ideas about change and permanence. Some, like Heraclitus, who spoke of rivers that are never the same from one moment to the next, might have said that the ship shows us the truth that nothing remains itself, that everything is in flux, that to seek an unchanging identity is to chase an illusion. Others, like Plato, who believed in eternal forms beyond the shifting world of matter, might have said that the Ship of Theseus is still the ship because it belongs to a pattern, an ideal form of ship that is unbroken by the replacement of parts. To them, the planks and ropes were only shadows of the true ship, which lived in the realm of forms, untouched by decay. Aristotle, more practical, might have looked at the ship and asked whether its purpose, its function, was what made it endure, that as long as it served the role of the Ship of Theseus, it remained the same. And so, even among the Greeks, the vessel became more than wood and sail. It became a mirror in which each philosopher saw his own ideas reflected. As time moved forward, the echoes continued. Roman thinkers considered it when they spoke of persistence, wondering how something could remain itself when everything about it changes. Medieval scholars turned the ship into a way of thinking about the soul, for they ask how a person could be judged the same across a lifetime, when the body is always in motion, always shifting, always renewed. They asked how resurrection or eternal life might be possible if the body one has is not the body one began with. In their hands, the Ship of Theseus became more than a vessel in Athens. It became a quiet question about the very nature of human existence. Later in the Age of Reason, John Locke took up the paradox and used it as a way of exploring personal identity. He asked whether a man remains the same when his memories change, whether identity lies in the continuity of consciousness rather than in the material of the body. To Locke, the ship was a tool to ask whether we are defined not by our parts, but by our awareness of ourselves. David Hume, always skeptical, suggested that perhaps identity itself is nothing more than a habit of the mind, that we call something the same only because it is convenient, that the Ship of Theseus is only the same because people choose to speak of it as such, not because there is any deeper truth binding it together. In his view, identity was not a solid structure but a shadow, a bundle of perceptions stitched together by imagination. The puzzle drifted into modern times, taken up again and again, reshaped in new forms. Some philosophers saw in it a question of nations. If every generation of citizens is replaced, if every law is rewritten, if every building is rebuilt, is the nation still the same? Others saw in it a question of technology. If a machine has each of its parts replaced, does it remain the same machine? In our own age, it becomes even more pressing, for we ask whether a digital mind copied from one body to another would be the same consciousness, whether a person preserved through memory alone is still themselves. Each age adds a new echo, and yet none silences the paradox. And this is what makes the Ship of Theseus endure, not as a riddle that can be solved once and for all, but as a vessel for thought, a structure that carries the same question across time, just as it once carried a hero across the sea. Imagine the long chain of thinkers stretching from Athens to now, each turning the puzzle over in their minds, each writing, speaking, teaching, never ending it, only passing it forward. The ship rocks gently in the harbour, and around it the voices of centuries gather, each one adding to the echo, each one leaving behind another layer of reflection. And as you let this drift through your imagination, you realise that a simple vessel of wood and rope became one of the deepest mirrors for thought, not by being answered, but by never being answered, by carrying its question endlessly forward like a tide that never stops. When the Athenians puzzled over the Ship of Theseus, many could not help but think of themselves, because what is a ship slowly replaced plank by plank, if not a reflection of the way our own bodies change with time? From the moment you are born, your body is never still. Cells divide, grow and die. Bones stretch taller, then grow denser, then weaken again. Muscles strengthen with use, shrink with age, shift with every choice you make. Skin renews, hair falls, blood replenishes. Almost nothing that formed you in your first years of life remains with you decades later, and yet at every stage you still speak of yourself as though you were one and the same. Consider the child you once were. Small hands, unlined face, simple laughter, quick tears. The molecules that made up that child are long gone, dispersed into the world, replaced by new ones drawn from every meal you've eaten since, from every glass of water, from every breath of air. And still, if you look at an old photograph of that child, you do not hesitate to say, "That was me." The bones are gone, the skin has changed, the thoughts are unrecognizable, but the story binds them together into one life. You are the ship carried forward plank by plank, cell by cell, thought by thought. Yet the question lingers, where exactly does identity lie? Some say it lies in the body itself, that as long as the organism continues in motion, the person remains, even if the material shifts. Others argue it lies not in the body but in memory, that what ties you to your past is the thread of recollection, the ability to look backward and say, "I was there, I felt that, I lived that." Locke believed this, that continuity of consciousness defines the self. If you can remember being a child, then you are still that child. If you can remember yesterday, you're still the one who lived yesterday. But memory is fragile and it fades. As people grow old, entire chapters of life sometimes vanish into the fog of forgetting. Names slip away, events blur, decades collapse into silence. Does the person become someone new when memory no longer stretches back to youth? If the Ship of Theseus is rebuilt and no one recalls its original form, is it still the same vessel? The parallel is almost too perfect to ignore. And then think of moments in life when memory shifts not only through forgetting but through change. People speak of themselves as though they are not the same as before. "I am not who I used to be," they say, after grief, after joy, after transformation. A man broken by sorrow feels himself to be another than the boy he once was. A woman strengthened by hardship says she no longer recognizes her former self, and yet they live in the same body. They carry the same name. They walk with the same identity through the world. The paradox is that we believe ourselves continuous, even when everything that composes us has altered. It is as though the mind weaves a story, a narrative that stretches across every replacement, every forgotten moment, every new chapter. That story is what binds, even if it is not material, even if it is not perfect, even if it is sometimes an illusion. And here lies the parallel with the ship. Athens believed in its continuity because the story never broke, because people never stopped calling it the Ship of Theseus. You believe in your own continuity for the same reason. because you never stop calling yourself by your name, never stop thinking of yourself as the one who endures. Whether it is true or not may be impossible to decide. Perhaps you are the same, perhaps you're always new, perhaps you're both at once. But the paradox itself, quietly unfolding, makes you see your own life not as a solid block but as a flowing vessel, always moving, always changing, always persisting, plank by plank, memory by memory carried forward without end. When we think of what makes us who we are, it is tempting to point to the body, to the continuity of flesh and bone. But the body is only part of the picture. Beneath the surface lies something less visible yet more decisive, and that is memory. Memory is what tells you where you have been, what you have done, who you have known, and without it the story of your life would dissolve into scattered fragments with no order. And yet memory itself is not as firm as we often believe. It shifts, it fades, it is replaced and altered in ways that are subtle enough to escape notice. It is not a library with shelves neatly stacked, but a living, breathing thing that is constantly being written and rewritten, like planks on a ship that are never left untouched by weather. Think of how easily small details slip away. You may recall a day from childhood and see it in your mind, but the colours are muted, the voice is indistinct, the air empty of smells that were once sharp and vivid. You hold on to the outline of the memory, but much of what gave it life has been lost. Over time, entire sections of your past may erode like worn wood discarded at the shipyard. A year may vanish into a handful of hazy impressions, a decade into a few scattered images. Still, even as memories fall away, you do not feel yourself becoming someone else. You still hold on to the belief that you are the same person, even though the planks that once composed your mind have been removed and replaced by new ones. And memory does not only fade. Each time you recall an event, you rebuild it, and in that rebuilding you make changes. A story told again and again is not preserved but reshaped. A detail becomes brighter than it was, a sequence of events is reversed, an emotion is exaggerated. Over years, the memory you carry may bear little resemblance to what truly happened, yet it feels as solid to you as the day it was first lived. In this way, the planks of memory are not simply replaced but subtly carved into new shapes, and still you treat the vessel as though it is whole. Psychologists have shown how malleable memory can be, how people can even come to believe events that never happened at all. Yet once the memory is there, it binds itself into identity as firmly as any other. If you think you experienced it, it becomes part of who you are. Now consider forgetting in its more profound forms. As people grow old, memory sometimes unravels, names of loved ones vanish, places once familiar become strange, entire years are lost to a fog that does not lift. And yet families continue to speak of the person as the same, because even when memory is stripped away, the story of identity is carried on by those around them. It is as though, when the ship is too damaged to be recognized by itself, the community around it insists that it is still the Ship of Theseus, still deserving of the same name, still anchored in the same history. In this way, memory is not only personal, but collective. Others remember for you, others hold your story when you cannot. And yet, if every memory within you is replaced, if the entire storehouse of your life is rebuilt with new material, can you still say that you are the same self? This is the heart of the paradox. We imagine the self as a single unbroken thread, yet the fabric of memory is constantly being rewoven, threads pulled out, colours changed, patterns shifted, until what remains is as different from the original as a new ship is from the old. Perhaps identity is not in the material of memory at all, but in the act of continuing, in the simple persistence of being, in the feeling of I am, that does not need a perfect record to survive. The Ship of Theseus drifts on, rebuilt again and again, and the mind does the same, reconstructing its past even as it changes, never fixed, never whole, yet always insisting on its sameness. The paradox of the Ship of Theseus was never solved by the Athenians alone, but it was lived by them, because every day that they walked past the harbour and saw the vessel anchored there, they chose to recognise it as the same. In this sense, identity was never simply a matter of wood or form, but of agreement. The planks could be changed, the mast replaced, the sails renewed, but as long as the people of Athens continued to point at it and say, "That is the Ship of Theseus," it remained so. The act of naming, the act of recognition, was as powerful as any material structure. And this same pattern extends to human life, for you are never only who you believe yourself to be. You're also who others say you are, who they remember you to be, and who they continue to recognize you as. From the moment you're born, you're given a name, and that name becomes a thread binding you to a story that is told not only by you, but by everyone around you. Parents speak your name when you're still too young to know it. Friends call it across years and distances. Teachers record it in lists. Strangers read it on documents. The name attaches itself to the idea of you and carries it forward through every transformation of body and mind. In this way, the name functions like the figure carved at the front of a ship, leading it forward no matter how often the boards are repaired. Even when the vessel beneath has changed entirely, the figurehead remains a symbol that reassures onlookers that it is the same ship. Society holds memory in a similar way. There are things you forget, sometimes small details, sometimes entire chapters of life, but people around you remember. A parent recalls the way you once spoke when you were a child. A friend tells you stories of adventures you have already allowed to fade. A community keeps traditions alive that you may no longer consciously recall. These external memories act as planks stored outside the vessel, pieces of your identity kept safe in others until you return to claim them. In this sense, you're never only the sum of your own memories, for society itself acts as a larger memory, carrying you when your own mind cannot. But society does not only preserve, it also shapes. You are given roles, sometimes chosen, sometimes imposed: student, neighbour, worker, citizen, child, parent, friend. Each role is like a fresh coat of paint laid upon the hull of a ship, sometimes covering what lies beneath, sometimes altering the way the ship is seen altogether. These roles change over time. You leave one behind, take on another, or even carry several at once. Yet even as the colours shift, the name of the ship remains. You may change jobs, beliefs, even homes, yet others continue to recognise you as the same person. They remember who you were last year, last decade, and they tie that person to the one you are now, weaving continuity from their own perspective even when you feel yourself to have changed completely. There is comfort in this, for it anchors you to a larger whole. But there is also unease, because it means that who you are is never only in your own hands. Just as the Athenians decided the ship's continuity by insisting on its name, society insists on your continuity by keeping you within its fabric, even if you feel you've transformed beyond recognition. Think of someone who has reinvented themselves, leaving behind an old life, moving to a new place, even adopting a new way of living. To themselves, they may feel like a new vessel, entirely rebuilt. Yet to those who knew them before, they remain the same, bound by memory, by name, by shared history. In this way, identity is never a solitary possession. It is relational, co-created, held in place by the recognition of others. Perhaps this is why funerals matter, why stories are told after death, why names are carved into stone. Even when the body is gone and memory within it has ceased, society insists on continuity by speaking the name, by saying this person lived, this person mattered, this person endures in story. Just as the Athenians kept calling the ship by its name long after every plank had been replaced, communities keep calling a person by their name long after every cell, every thought, every breath has changed. The paradox, then, is not only about material or memory, but also about recognition. Perhaps a ship is the Ship of Theseus not because of what it is, but because people agree that it is so. Perhaps you are yourself not because of what you are, but because society agrees to see you that way. And in that recognition lies both stability and fragility. For if people were to stop saying your name, to stop telling your story, the identity you hold would drift like a vessel unmoored, its anchor gone, its continuity dissolved into the open sea. When the Athenians gazed at the Ship of Theseus, they did not only see wood and rope, they saw a vessel, something meant to carry, something that outlived its parts because of the purpose it served. And in much the same way, the body can be understood as a vessel, carrying the self through the waters of time. Yet, just as with the ship, the vessel is never still, never unchanging. Every moment the body is undergoing countless small transformations. Cells are dying by the millions, and new ones are taking their place. Skin flakes away invisibly while new layers rise beneath. Hair grows and falls. Blood cells live for weeks before being replaced. Bones constantly dissolve and rebuild in cycles. Even the stomach lining remakes itself every few days. Over years, almost nothing of the material body remains the same. Scientists sometimes say that within a span of years, most of the atoms that once made you have been exchanged for others, drawn from food, air and water. And yet you look at yourself in the mirror and see continuity. You recognize the face as your own, even though it has never been fixed. Think of the way a child grows into an adult. The soft bones of infancy harden, the proportions shift, voices change, features sharpen. Later, adulthood softens into age, wrinkles form, hair fades or changes colour, muscle weakens, posture bends. The vessel transforms so completely that the child and the elder could hardly recognize each other if they were to meet, and yet they are both you. Just as the Athenians pointed to the vessel in the harbour and said, "This is the same ship," you point to your own changing form and say, "This is the same self." The body functions as an anchor in the eyes of others as well. Family members who have not seen you in years may still find recognition in a glance. Friends identify you by posture, walk, or tone of voice. Society uses the vessel as a marker of continuity, even when the pieces have all been exchanged. This recognition mirrors the collective decision of Athens, where the agreement of the many gave the ship its enduring identity. But the vessel raises questions too. If a limb is lost, are you less yourself? If an organ is replaced, if technology allows prosthetics or artificial implants, does your identity diminish or remain untouched? Medicine has already carried us into this paradox. A person with a transplanted heart lives on and is still recognized as the same, just as the ship with a new mast was still Theseus's. But what if more and more parts are replaced, until perhaps the vessel is entirely artificial? Does identity cling to the body at all, or is the body merely a container, a hull carrying something more elusive inside? The body is also symbolic, and society treats it that way. Rituals like funerals, where bodies are honoured or laid to rest, reveal how deeply people tie identity to the vessel. Even after death, when the self is gone, the body is still treated as though it carries some essence of the person it once held. Graves, mummifications, cremations, all are ways societies preserve or transform the vessel as if it still carries continuity. The Ship of Theseus was kept not because the wood mattered, but because it symbolized memory, and in the same way, the body is treated as more than matter, as though it were the story itself. And yet if the body is only a vessel, then perhaps what it carries is more important than what it is made of. Ships are remembered for voyages, not planks, and people are remembered for lives, not cells. The vessel deceives us with an illusion of permanence. We cling to it because it feels solid, it feels present, it gives us a sense of anchoring. But beneath the surface, it is changing with every breath, every heartbeat, every passing day. And so, the body is both the most familiar thing and the most deceptive, for it gives the appearance of sameness while constantly renewing itself, just as the Athenians' ship stood year after year at the harbour, a vessel that was never what it had been but always treated as though it was. The question of replacement has always hovered at the heart of the Ship of Theseus, and it remains one of the most unsettling puzzles, because it is both ordinary and profound. At first, the process feels harmless. One plank is broken, so it is swapped for another, and no one doubts the vessel is the same. The ship sails on, carrying the same crew, guided by the same name, bearing the same history. But years pass, repairs accumulate, and eventually every plank has been replaced, every rope renewed, every mast restored. Is it still the Ship of Theseus, or only a perfect imitation built over time? The difficulty lies in how gradual change escapes notice. When only one part shifts at a time, we accept continuity without question. But if the entire ship had been taken apart in one day and replaced at once, few would hesitate to say it was a different vessel. The paradox reveals how deeply continuity depends on the rhythm of replacement. Slow change feels like sameness, while sudden change feels like rupture. The same tension exists in human life. Consider the body. A tooth repaired, a bone healed, a heart transplanted. Each replacement is accepted as part of survival, not as a new identity. Yet what if the process continues until every organ, every bone, every cell is exchanged? Would you still be the same person, or would you become someone else entirely wearing the mask of your old self? Science reminds us that this replacement is already happening invisibly, quietly, each moment. The matter composing you now is not the matter that composed you years ago, yet you are still recognized as yourself. Continuity, it seems, does not rest in matter, but in story. And yet the unease lingers, for replacement can also multiply. Imagine if every plank discarded from Theseus's ship were gathered and rebuilt into a second vessel. Which would be the real ship then? The one that carried continuous use through the years, or the one assembled from the original material? This question stretches beyond ships and bodies and into nearly every part of life. Think of a favourite tool, perhaps a hammer or a knife. The handle might wear out and be replaced, the blade dulled and then sharpened, even swapped for a new one, yet the tool is still spoken of as the same because the hand that uses it insists on continuity. Languages, too, undergo replacement. Words fall out of use, grammar shifts, pronunciations change, and yet we speak of English or Greek as though they have always been the same tongue, even though the English spoken 1,000 years ago is almost unrecognisable today. Cultures function in the same way. Traditions evolve, rituals alter, clothing, architecture, and music change completely across centuries, yet a people still call themselves by the same name, just as the Athenians still called the ship by its name long after its planks were new. Even cities embody the paradox. Streets are rebuilt, walls crumble, neighbourhoods are replaced by new ones, generations come and go, but the city is treated as one continuous entity. Athens remained Athens no matter how much of it was renewed, just as the ship remained Theseus's no matter how many repairs it endured. In all these cases, replacement is not merely tolerated, it is necessary. A ship that is not maintained rots. A body that does not heal perishes. A culture that does not adapt fades. Replacement is the mechanism by which continuity survives, yet it is also the mechanism that blurs the line between old and new. and so the paradox persists. How much can be replaced before the thing itself is lost? One answer is that identity rests in continuity of function. The ship carried sailors, the body carries the self, the city carries its people. As long as the function endures, we allow the name to remain. Another answer is that identity lies in continuity of recognition. The Athenians agreed to keep calling the ship Theseus's, and so it was. Friends agreed to keep calling you by your name, and so you remain yourself. But neither answer is entirely secure, for function can change and recognition can fade. What if one day no one remembered Theseus's ship, no one spoke its name, no one tied it to its story? Would it still be the same ship, or just wood and sail? What if one day no one remembered you, your name, your story? Would the vessel of your body still hold an identity, or only a form passing into silence? The question of replacement unsettles because it reveals how fragile identity truly is, how much it relies on stories, agreements, and illusions that we seldom question. Perhaps there is no precise moment when the ship ceases to be itself, or when you cease to be you. Perhaps replacement is not the exception, but the essence of continuity. For everything changes, and the only reason we believe in sameness is because we have agreed to tell the story as if nothing has been lost. And this agreement, this silent weaving of memory, does not belong only to the Athenians staring at their ship in the harbour. It threads itself into the way we live now, in a world filled with objects and systems that are constantly being repaired, upgraded and renewed. Consider the phone in your hand, perhaps once pristine, then cracked, its screen replaced, its battery failing and then exchanged, its inner parts quietly upgraded across time, and yet still you say it is your phone, the same one you have always carried. Or think of the car that has followed a family through decades, its tyres swapped countless times, its paint refreshed, its parts rebuilt, and still it is called the same car that first rolled onto the road, because the continuity of ownership, the story of journeys taken within it, ties the parts into a single identity. Computers follow the same rhythm. A processor exchanged, memory expanded, entire components replaced, and still the user regards it as the same machine, because what matters is not the matter itself, but the role it continues to play. In this way, the Ship of Theseus did not stay in Athens. It sailed quietly into every modern home, disguised as maintenance, repair, and habit. The same pattern reveals itself on a larger scale when we look to our cities. Walk through London, Paris, New York, or Tokyo, and you are not walking the same streets that once stood centuries ago. Fires consumed, wars destroyed, new designs rose, population shifted entirely, and yet people still say they live in the same city their ancestors once knew. Athens of today is not the Athens of Theseus, but it carries the same name, the same identity, as though the thread of continuity is unbroken. The materials have all been replaced, but the memory holds the shape, just as the Athenians once insisted on the identity of their ship. Nations mirror this paradox as well. Governments fall, flags change, languages mix, traditions evolve, yet countries declare themselves continuous, their identity carried by symbols and names that endure even when the reality has been remade countless times. Greece today does not resemble ancient Greece, and yet the name stitches them together as though they were one and the same. America today would be unrecognizable to its earliest founders, yet it still claims the same story, the same continuity, even though its every law, belief, and structure has been replaced. We hold tightly to these illusions because without them, the very idea of heritage and belonging would dissolve. The paradox hides not only in objects and nations, but in the language we speak. The English of today is not the English of centuries ago. Words have vanished, pronunciations have shifted, grammar has bent itself into new shapes, and yet we call it one continuous tongue. We teach it, we write in it, we believe in its identity because the change was gradual, not sudden, and so our minds accept the story of sameness. Music echoes the same truth. A song re-recorded, remixed, sung by different voices across decades still feels like the same melody. Each version replaces something of the old, and yet listeners hear continuity because the memory of what it once was binds each replacement together. Even traditions tell this story. Festivals shift their meanings, clothing styles change, rituals adapt to new eras, but people still call them the same celebrations. What began as a harvest ritual may become a religious one, then a cultural one. But the thread of continuity, carefully carried by generations, makes it feel unchanged. Even the food passed down through families changes this way. Recipes adjusted, ingredients substituted, methods altered, yet the dish is still called by the same name, still linked to memory, still carrying the story of belonging. And in smaller, quieter places, the paradox continues. A family home renovated beyond recognition is still remembered as my home. An heirloom, restored again and again, polished until no trace of the original material remains, is still cherished as the same object once held by ancestors. What truly survives is not the matter, but the memory, the agreement to tell the story as though nothing was lost. In this way, the Ship of Theseus is not an ancient curiosity. It is a rhythm of modern life, the hidden logic that allows us to move through change without being swallowed by it. We need to believe in continuity, so we do, even when every part has been quietly replaced. So if continuity in objects, in cities, in nations, and even within the self can be preserved through memory and story, then it is not surprising that the same hidden rhythm shapes the bonds we share with others, for relationships too are ships that never stop being repaired. Consider the way friendship stretches across time. The boy or girl you once knew as a child has grown, their voice has shifted, their habits have changed, their outlook reshaped by countless unseen days, and yet when you see them again you call them your friend as though no transformation has taken place. It is not the sameness of their body or their thoughts that keeps the bond alive, but the thread of memory, the small chain of experiences that ties you back to what once was. Each story told, each laugh remembered, becomes another plank, another rope, another sail that holds the vessel together, so even when nothing original survives, the continuity of friendship gives the illusion of permanence. Love follows this same paradox, perhaps even more deeply. Two people may fall into each other when they are young, when everything feels bright and new, and decades later they stand side by side as strangers to their former selves. Their faces have shifted with time, their bodies renewed cell by cell, their thoughts reshaped by hardship and joy, and yet they still say they're bound by the same love, as though it has endured unchanged. What holds it together is not material sameness, but the story told across time, the anniversaries remembered, the moments repeated, the names spoken softly through the years. Each of these serves as a plank that is replaced, ensuring the vessel continues to sail, even as the sea of life erodes its every piece. Families reveal this rhythm in another form. Parents age, their roles change, children grow, independence arrives, the household shifts, and yet the identity of the family persists. You're still a son or daughter, even when your parents are no longer the same people who raised you. A parent is still called by the same name, even when the years have altered their voice, their body, their very way of being. Continuity is preserved in the titles, in the rituals of family gatherings, in the shared stories told again and again, even as every plank of daily life has been replaced. The paradox of the ship lives in the hearth, just as it lives in the harbour. Sometimes this paradox appears sharply, and we're forced to notice it. You may reconnect with someone after many years apart, and though both of you have been remade by time, you feel the spark of recognition and say you have found your old friend again. It is not sameness that you feel, but continuity, the vessel of memory waiting silently in the water for you to return. And sometimes the opposite occurs. You look into the face of someone you once loved and realize you no longer know them, because the changes have overtaken the story and the thread of continuity has snapped. The ship is still there, but it is no longer the one you once sailed upon together. This too reveals the truth, that relationships endure only when the narrative of sameness is stronger than the reality of change. Communities and societies embody this same paradox on a larger scale. A village may remain the same village for centuries, though its people change entirely, though its buildings are rebuilt, though its customs adapt. The name of the place, the shared memory of belonging, acts as the vessel that carries identity across time. Even smaller bonds, quiet ones, follow this rhythm. Think of the companionship of a pet. The animal changes as it grows older, its energy shifts, its habits change, but you continue to call it the same beloved companion because your story together never broke. Relationships survive change in the same way the ship did, by never ceasing to be repaired. The sails are patched, the planks replaced, the ropes renewed, but the vessel sails on because those who stand upon it insist it is the same. In truth, no relationship is ever static. They are vessels of constant replacement, rebuilt moment by moment, word by word, memory by memory, and yet we rarely notice, because to notice would be unsettling. We prefer the comfort of believing that love is eternal, that friendship endures unchanged, that family is fixed, when in reality everything within them has shifted. But the story and the memory, the agreement to treat continuity as truth, that is what keeps the vessel whole. And so relationships, like ships, drift across the seas of time, surviving not by sameness, but by the fragile, powerful belief that nothing essential has been lost. And if relationships survive change only because we choose to see them as unbroken, then perhaps the same is true of everything else. For permanence itself may not be substance at all, but a fragile illusion we weave so that life feels steady enough to live within. The ship in the harbour was never truly the same ship. Your friend was never truly the same friend. Your body is never truly the same body. And yet we carry on as though these identities endure unchanged. Without this illusion of permanence, life would feel unbearably unstable. Each day a fresh beginning without a past to anchor it. Each meeting with another person, a meeting of strangers. Each home a place without roots. Imagine how disorienting it would be to wake every morning and believe you're no longer the self who closed your eyes the night before. To look at those you love and see them as entirely new people, with no connection to the ones you once knew. And yet, in a quiet way, this is exactly what is happening. Cells renew, thoughts shift, voices change, buildings are rebuilt, customs are altered, and still we pretend that the line of identity is unbroken. It is not the matter that carries on, but the story, the memory, the agreement to see continuity where only fragments remain. Objects around us reveal this clearly. A table passed down through generations may have been repaired, refinished, or even remade, yet it is called the same table because its identity is preserved in the tale we tell of its survival. A book copied, bound again, and read by countless hands is still called the same story, even though no page is original. Traditions follow the same path. The holidays we celebrate today are not the same ones our ancestors observed, yet we treat them as if they were unchanged. The rituals have been bent, the foods replaced, the symbols reinterpreted, but the illusion of permanence allows us to feel that we are repeating something eternal, something that connects us directly to the past. Language is another vessel of this quiet deception. The words you speak are not the words spoken centuries ago, their meanings altered, their sounds reshaped, their forms eroded and rebuilt. Yet we insist it is one language, stretching across time as though it were a single unbroken voice. Cities too are preserved by this illusion. A place rebuilt after fire is still spoken of as the same city, though every stone has been replaced, every street plan altered, every generation renewed. Nations are the same, borders change, governments fall, people shift, but the nation is still said to endure, its name carried forward as if nothing has been lost. Even the seasons whisper this pattern. Winter returns each year, yet it is never the same winter. It is a new collection of days, a new pattern of storms, a new gathering of cold, but we call it winter as though it were a permanent thing. Permanence is not found in the matter of the world, but in the way we choose to perceive it, in the stories we agree to tell ourselves so that life feels continuous. Perhaps this illusion is not a flaw but a necessity, for without it we would be unmoored, drifting without anchors, unable to carry meaning across the endless cycle of change. The paradox of the ship unsettles us because it exposes the fragility of permanence, but at the same time it reveals the quiet strength of our need to create it. We do not live in sameness, but in continuity, and continuity is nothing more than memory and agreement. Permanence may not exist in truth, but the belief in it holds the world together, binding fragments into wholes, stitching moments into stories, and carrying identity across time as though nothing had ever been lost. And if permanence is only the story we agree to tell, then the paradox does not simply sit out there in ships and cities and languages. It lives within us in ways so ordinary we barely notice them. And perhaps it has always lived there, hidden in the quiet rhythms of being alive. For you are yourself a vessel that is never fixed, never finished, always in the process of renewal, yet you move through the world with a single name, a single voice, a single memory that convinces you that you are whole. Every part of you is changing, every cell quietly dissolving and being replaced, every thought shifting, every memory reweaving itself. And yet you insist without hesitation that you're the same person you were yesterday, and the same person you were years ago. But if the planks of Theseus's ship trouble philosophers, then how much more should your own body trouble you? For you are not only a ship with planks replaced, but a river whose waters never remain the same for more than an instant. Think of your skin, always shedding, renewing itself until nothing of what once covered you remains. Think of your bones, slowly dissolving and rebuilding, reshaped by time and pressure, until not a trace of the childhood skeleton survives. Think of the blood that carries life through you, cells that live only for a short while before being replaced by others, and yet you never say you are someone new. You never say you're not yourself. You accept the illusion of permanence without thinking, because to do otherwise would be to lose the anchor that allows you to live. And memory is no more secure than flesh. The moments you recall from childhood, the faces you believe you see again when you close your eyes, these are not untouched fragments of the past but reconstructions, changing each time they are retrieved, bent and reshaped by the act of remembering itself. And yet you trust them. You believe the child who laughed long ago was you, that the voice you hear in the memory was yours, that the joy or the fear was part of your continuous story. The truth is that the self who experienced those moments is gone, dissolved into the passing of time, replaced by countless selves who only inherit the echoes. Still you speak of your life as though it were a single thread. Still you live as though permanence were real. Look at how habits change, how preferences alter. The foods you once loved may no longer bring comfort. The music that once moved you may now feel distant. The ideas you once held tightly may now seem strange, and yet you weave all of these selves into one identity. You do not see them as strangers, but as layers of the same being. And when someone asks who you are, you do not hesitate to answer, even though the one who speaks is not the one who lived those earlier years. What makes this possible is not matter, but narrative. Not the unbroken survival of a single self, but the agreement to believe that continuity holds. Even your reflection in the mirror plays into this illusion. Each year the image shifts, the lines deepen, the posture changes, the eyes take on new shapes of light, but you nod as though nothing important has altered, as though the one staring back is the same one who has always been there. And when you speak of the future you say, "I will do this," or "I will become that," as though the person who will live in those distant days is still you and not some other inheritor of your story. In this way you live with the paradox every moment of your life, both endlessly replaced and yet continuously the same. It is not a trick, not a deception, but a necessity, for without it you would be unable to carry the weight of memory forward, unable to plan, unable to love. Imagine for a moment if you could not live with this paradox. Imagine if you woke each day and truly believed that the one who opened their eyes was a stranger, unrelated to the one who closed them the night before. You would be adrift in a world without self, unable to trust memory, unable to hold identity. Life would feel like a series of fragments without connection, and so you live with the paradox not because it is true, but because it is kind, because it is the only way to survive the endless process of replacement. The Ship of Theseus is not only an old puzzle of wood and nails, it is the condition of human life, a mirror held quietly before you every day, reminding you that sameness is not substance but continuity, not matter but story. You are the ship rebuilt plank by plank. You are the memory retold again and again. You are the self remade but still called by one name, and in that illusion you find the strength to carry forward. And so if you are already living as a Ship of Theseus, then it feels natural to return once more to the ship itself, the vessel that first carried this question into the world, resting quietly in the harbour of Athens, tethered not only by ropes to the dock, but by centuries of memory to the minds of all who heard its story. Picture it again, not as an artifact, but as something alive, breathing in the rhythm of waves against its hull, rocking gently beneath the sun. Imagine the colour of the water, green and shifting, the way the planks meet the tide, the faint creak of timbers as they settle into place. Generations of Athenians stood on that shore and looked at the ship, and each saw something slightly different, for the vessel itself was never the same twice. Some saw sails still bright from recent repairs, some saw oars freshly carved and tied into their slots, some saw ropes replaced only the week before, yet all of them believed they were gazing at the same ship that carried Theseus home. And perhaps it did not matter to them whether the wood had been changed, because what they saw was not wood at all but continuity, a thread binding them to their past. Think of how a city itself changes. Athens was never the same across centuries. New buildings rose, old ones fell, walls were rebuilt, streets reshaped, yet the people called it Athens as though its identity were untouched. The ship mirrored the city, and the city mirrored the ship, both shifting under the slow hand of time while the story remained intact. And when the citizens walked past the harbour and glanced at the vessel, they were reminded not of its planks but of its meaning, the voyages it represented, the hero whose name gave it life. Perhaps this is the secret of objects that endure in memory. They become less about the matter that composes them, and more about the story we choose to attach. And so the ship was never truly about the oak beams or the pitch that sealed them, but about the belief that something unbroken carried forward from a legendary past into the present moment. As you return to it now in thought, you can feel how strange and gentle this illusion is. To see the ship rocking in the harbour is to see not an object, but an idea that has slipped free from the wood itself and taken root in human imagination. And when you realise this, you see that the ship was never just one vessel. It was countless versions, each rebuilt, each slightly altered, each carrying the same name. It was an endless procession of replacements hidden beneath the cloak of continuity, a chain of forms bound together by memory. And as you let your mind linger on this, you notice how easily the mind accepts the paradox, how quickly it smooths over the breaks and accepts the whole, just as you greet yourself in the mirror as though nothing had changed. The Athenians greeted their ship as though nothing had been lost. And even now, centuries later, you return to it not in matter but in thought, and still you call it the Ship of Theseus. It no longer exists in the harbour, no longer floats upon the water, and yet in a sense it has never disappeared, because the idea is strong enough to endure without wood, without sail, without oar. The ship has become more than an object. It has become a metaphor woven into the human mind, and as you imagine it there, anchored against the horizon, you're not only looking at an ancient vessel, you're looking at yourself, at the way memory and story carry you forward across change, at the way you survive through replacement by telling the tale as if nothing were broken. And so as we return once more to the quiet harbour, where the Ship of Theseus sways gently in thought more than in timber, the story begins to thin into something softer, something slower, like the fading of day into night. The ship rocks against the tide, and with each movement you can almost hear centuries of voices, Athenians who once stood by the water's edge, whispering to themselves that this was still the same vessel, still the ship of their hero, still their connection to something larger than their own lives. And in hearing them, you realise that you are doing the very same thing, carrying the idea forward not in wood, but in memory, not in planks, but in the act of remembering. The ship has become less about beams and nails and more about the way human beings cling to continuity, the way we smooth over breaks and stitch together fragments to create the comfort of a whole. You too are carried forward in this way, each moment dissolving into the next, each breath vanishing as soon as it arrives, each thought flickering and gone, yet still you hold yourself together, still you speak of yourself as one. Perhaps this is the only way life can be lived, not by demanding permanence, but by agreeing to believe in it, by allowing change to wear the mask of continuity. In that gentle agreement, you find calm, for you no longer need to resist change. You only need to see it as part of the same unfolding. Look again at the ship in the harbour. The sails are quiet now, no longer filled with wind, and the ropes lie slack against the mast. The water is dark, carrying the fading reflection of the sky, a sky that is losing its last colours, drifting into night. The ship does not move forward, and yet it still exists, still telling its story simply by remaining there. In this way, you too need not strive to hold everything unchanged. You can allow life to move, to shift, to replace itself plank by plank, thought by thought, while you remain the witness, the storyteller, the continuity. And as the ship becomes less distinct, as it softens into the horizon of your imagination, you can feel how the paradox itself dissolves. It no longer matters whether the ship is the same or different, whether you are the same or different, whether anything endures in matter or not. What matters is that the story continues, and as long as the story is told, nothing is truly lost. The ship will always float in memory, and you will always carry yourself forward in the quiet rhythm of identity. And so you may let the harbour grow silent, you may let the ship recede into shadow, you may let the waters become still. The paradox has done its work. It has shown you that continuity is not about holding tight, but about letting go, trusting that what is essential will carry through even as the details change. And in that trust, you may rest. You may let your thoughts drift as the ship drifts. You may let your mind loosen as the ropes loosen. You may let the story quiet as the night grows deeper. For the ship of Theseus does not sail away. It simply waits, always waiting in the calm harbour of thought, ready to be seen again whenever memory calls. And you too may rest, knowing that you are whole even as you change, knowing that identity holds even as it replaces itself, knowing that the rhythm of continuity is gentle enough to carry you through this night and into the next. So let the story become softer, let it fade into silence, let it ease you into the calm waters of sleep, where change is no longer a riddle but a rhythm, and where you too drift like a vessel carried by tides that have always known the way.